March 12, 1946, just after 9:30 p.m. The Oval Office, Washington, D.C. The White House is quiet in a way it never was during the war. No messengers running, no telephones ringing off the hook, just the low hum of lamps and the faint scrape of paper as President Harry S. Truman leans forward at his desk. A single document lies open before him. Typed, crisp, British. The words are unmistakably Churchill's, dense, urgent, almost breathless. Not a speech, not for the public. This is something else entirely. A personal appeal, one statesman to another. Truman removes his glasses and rubs his eyes. He had been in office for less than a year. Roosevelt is gone. The war is over. America wants to sleep. But the man writing to him will not let that happen. Outside, Pennsylvania Avenue glistens with recent rain. Inside, the message is clear. The peace they believe they've won is already slipping away. You can almost feel the tension tightening in Truman's jaw as he reads on. Because Truman is not congratulating him, he is warning him. Only 10 months earlier, Europe had erupted in celebration. Church bells rang from London to Lisbon. Soldiers wept openly in the streets of Paris. The Reich had fallen. Hitler was dead. The guns were finally silent. But Churchill, now out of office, saw something others did not, or refused to see. He had not slept well since Potsdam. The conferences, the smiles, the handshakes with Stalin, the carefully staged photographs masked something colder beneath. Churchill had watched the Soviet leader closely, how he listened without revealing anything, how his eyes never softened, how every word seemed weighed for advantage. Victory had not changed Stalin, it had freed him. By early 1946, Soviet troops still occupied vast swaths of Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, countries liberated by the Red Army, but now finding themselves shackled by it. Churchill's letter does not waste time on pleasantries. He writes of a shadow falling across the continent, of governments bending under pressure, of free elections postponed, then quietly erased, of borders hardening, not softening in the aftermath of war. The language is stark, purposefully so. This is not rhetoric, this is a diagnosis, and the prognosis is grim. Churchill knows Truman is no Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt had believed, right to the end, that Stalin could be managed, that personal diplomacy, charm, and patience would keep the alliance intact. Churchill had tried that path. He had shared cigars with Stalin, toasted victory, negotiated percentages and spheres late into the night. And still, the Soviet advance did not stop.
Now, writing to Truman, Churchill strips away the illusion. He describes a line, unspoken, unannounced, stretching from the Baltic to the Adriatic. On one side, countries are still breathing freely. On the other hand, nations are already being sealed off. An iron barrier, heavy, descending. The phrase lands like a hammer. This is not a distant threat. Churchill makes that clear. He speaks of weeks, not years, of momentum, of fait accompli that once accepted will be impossible to reverse. He warns that every delay strengthens Moscow's hand. And then he does something unexpected. He appeals not to Truman's authority, but to his courage. Churchill is 61 years old, a war hero, a Nobel-caliber orator, and yet the tone of the letter borders on desperation. He knows he no longer commands an army. All he has left is his voice. He urges Truman to recognize that the wartime alliance has expired, even if no one has formally declared it so. He argues that Stalin understands only strength, unity, and resolve, that conciliatory silence will be interpreted as permission. Churchill does not call for war, but he calls for readiness, for clarity, for a united front, Britain and America standing shoulder to shoulder before the lines fully harden. The subtext is unmistakable. If we fail now, the cost later will be catastrophic. Truman pauses at that part. The president has his own doubts about Stalin. He has seen the reports, read the cables from ambassadors in Europe, heard the unease from military planners watching Soviet troop movements with growing alarm. But America is exhausted. Millions of soldiers are coming home. Congress is cutting defense budgets. The public wants schools, highways, washing machines, not another enemy. Truman knows that acknowledging Churchill's warning means accepting a brutal truth. The war did not end in 1945. It merely changed shape. Across the Atlantic, Churchill waits. He paces the rooms of Chartwell, his country estate, cigar clenched between his fingers. Maps still cover his tables: Europe, Asia, the narrowing world. He has been dismissed once before. In July 1945, the British people voted him out of office in a landslide. The man who led them through their darkest hour was suddenly irrelevant, replaced by promises of welfare and reconstruction. Churchill understood the vote, but he did not accept the implications. He believed history had not finished with him yet. This letter, this plea to Truman, is his attempt to force the world's most powerful nation to see what he sees, to act before it is too late. Because Churchill is haunted by a memory. The 1930s. The warnings he gave about Hitler. The speeches were dismissed as alarmist. The years wasted while danger gathered strength behind polite diplomacy and wishful thinking. He will not make that mistake again, even if it costs him his reputation. Truman finishes reading and leans back in his chair. The room feels smaller now. Churchill's words echo with an uncomfortable familiarity, a sense that the world is standing at the edge of another divide, even as it celebrates the last victory. The president knows that if Churchill is right, the decisions made in the coming months will shape not just foreign policy, but the fate of entire nations. He folds the letter carefully. There will be consequences to taking this seriously, and the consequences of ignoring it. Outside, Washington sleeps. Inside, the Cold War has already begun. But neither man knows, yet, how openly this warning will soon be spoken, or how it will split the world in two. Because Churchill is not done, not by a long shot.
March 5, 1946, 2 p.m., Fulton, Missouri. The gymnasium smells of varnished wood and winter coats damp from melting snow. Folding chairs creak as the crowd shifts, restless but curious. On the small stage at Westminster College, a man waits behind the lectern, thick jowl set, eyes alert beneath heavy lids. Winston Spencer Churchill. No longer Prime Minister, no longer commanding armies or fleets, just a visiting speaker, introduced politely, almost casually. But there is nothing casual in the way he grips the edges of the podium. President Harry S. Truman sits just a few feet away, hands folded in his lap. He has agreed to attend as a courtesy, nothing more, at least officially. No prepared endorsement, no public alignment. Yet his presence alone electrifies the room. Churchill glances toward him once, a brief look, enough. Then he begins. His voice is lower than the crowd expects, gravelly, measured. Every word lands with deliberate weight. He speaks first of victory, of sacrifice, of the shared blood spilled by British and American soldiers. The audience nods, comfortable, eased by familiar terrain. Then, slowly, he turns. A tonal shift, almost imperceptible. The United States, he says, stands at this time at the pinnacle of world power. A compliment, yes, but also a responsibility. Churchill lets the silence stretch. You can almost hear the audience lean in. He speaks of a world no longer held together by the common enemy of Nazism, of uncertainty spreading where unity once stood, of nations watching, waiting, calculating. And then he delivers the line he had already placed before Truman in private, now sharpened for the public ear.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, Churchill says, pausing between the names, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The room stiffens. Some shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchange glances, unsure whether they have just heard a metaphor or a declaration. Churchill does not flinch. He names names: Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, Vienna. Cities that had just emerged from the wreckage of war are now trapped in a new kind of occupation. He speaks of police states, of shadow governments, of freedom traded for security under Soviet supervision. He does not call Stalin a tyrant. He does not need to. The implication hangs heavy in the air. Churchill insists that the Soviet Union does not want war, but wants the fruits of war: influence without opposition, expansion without consequence. And then, unmistakably, he makes his plea. Neither appeasement nor isolation will prevent catastrophe. Only unity, only strength, only a shared resolve between English-speaking peoples, bound not just by language, but by law, liberty, and the willingness to defend them. This is no academic lecture. This is a line drawn in public. Truman remains still throughout the speech, expression unreadable, but those close enough can see his jaw tighten as Churchill speaks of delay, of hesitation, of the danger of misreading Stalin's intentions. The president had not approved the speech beforehand, but he had read the letter. And now, sitting there under the bright lights of a Missouri gymnasium, Truman understands exactly what Churchill is doing. He is forcing the issue, dragging the conversation out of private correspondence and into the open, where it can no longer be ignored. Outside the building, reporters are already scribbling furiously. The phrase "Iron Curtain" is racing ahead of the speech itself, crackling across telephone wires, destined for headlines by nightfall. Churchill senses it too. He leans forward, voice hardening. "If Western democracies stand together," he says, "there is nothing they cannot achieve. If they falter, all may be lost." Short sentences, unmistakable warning. This is not about Britain's decline.
It is about America's rise, and whether it will use its power or retreat behind oceans and illusions of safety. The applause is uneven, polite in places, enthusiastic about others, uncertain overall. Some rise to their feet, others remain seated, arms crossed. Churchill steps back from the lectern, his face unreadable. Truman stands. Applause swells slightly, out of respect more than agreement. Within hours, the reaction will be fierce. Newspapers accuse Churchill of warmongering, of sabotaging peace, of dragging America into another European nightmare. The Soviet response is immediate and venomous. Pravda labels the speech a call to war. Stalin himself compares Churchill to Hitler, accusing him of racial supremacy and imperial ambition. The lines are hardening already. And Truman knows that by sitting beside Churchill, by remaining silent, he has been seen, whether he likes it or not, as choosing a side. That night, alone again in the White House, Truman rereads Churchill's earlier letter. The words feel different now. He realizes the speech was not an outburst, it was a strategy. Churchill had tried private persuasion. Now he has chosen public pressure. And it has worked, because the question can no longer be avoided. Is the Soviet Union an ally recovering from war, or an adversary preparing for the next one? Truman looks out the window toward the darkened city. The answer will define his presidency and the world's future. But before any policy can be written, Truman must confront something even more unsettling: the realization that Churchill's warning may already be late. Because behind the Iron Curtain, events are accelerating faster than anyone in Washington truly understands. Spring 1946, Eastern Europe.
Dawn breaks over Warsaw, but the city does not wake easily. Rubble still lines the streets. Blackened walls lean at unnatural angles, frozen mid-collapse. The war has ended here on paper, but not in spirit. Red Army trucks idle at intersections. Their engines rumble low, patient, permanent. Posters go up overnight. New faces, new slogans, words like People's Committee, Provisional Authority, promises of stability, of order, and always the same uniformed presence watching from the corners. Churchill's words were not speculation. They were observing. In Poland, the government in exile waits in London, powerless. At home, opposition leaders are summoned for talks and do not return. Ballot boxes appear, but the outcomes are decided long before a single vote is cast. In Romania, the king remains on the throne, but only as decoration. Soviet-backed ministers control the levers of power. Those who resist are dismissed, arrested, or quietly removed. Hungary follows, then Bulgaria. Each takeover is incremental, legalistic, almost polite, and that is what makes it so effective. No single moment triggers an alarm. No tanks roll dramatically into capitals under foreign flags. Instead, institutions are hollowed out from within, replaced piece by piece until nothing remains but the facade. From Washington, it looks messy, complicated, local. From Moscow, it is precise. Stalin never announces a doctrine. He does not need to. His worldview was forged long before the war, hardened by revolution, civil war, and invasion. To Stalin, buffer states are not aggression, they are surviving. The Soviet Union has been invaded twice in 30 years, millions dead, entire regions erased. He will not allow that again. And if securing the motherland requires controlling the political destiny of neighboring nations, so be it. Churchill understands this. That is why his language to Truman is so careful and so sharp. He does not argue that Stalin is irrational. He argues that Stalin is logical, and that makes him dangerous.
In Washington, cables begin to stack up. From Prague, from Vienna, from Berlin, reports of intimidation, of press censorship, of advisors arriving from Moscow and never leaving, of coalition governments collapsing in slow motion. General Lucius Clay, military governor of occupied Germany, sends increasingly blunt warnings. He speaks of Soviet obstruction, of rail lines cut without explanation, of zones becoming prisons. The wartime maps no longer make sense. Berlin, once the symbol of Nazi defeat, is now a fault line. American intelligence analysts begin to use a new phrase in their assessments: irreversible trends. Truman reads every report, and slowly, Churchill's tone, urgent, almost frantic, begins to feel not exaggerated, but restrained. The president convenes his advisors. The room fills with men who won the last war and are desperate to avoid the next one. George Marshall, Dean Acheson, James Burns. They debate semantics. Is this expansionism or insecurity? Are these defensive measures or ideological conquest? Can cooperation still be salvaged? Truman listens, then asks a simple question. What happens if we do nothing? No one answers immediately, because the answer is obvious. The Iron Curtain does not slam down all at once. It lowers quietly, and once it settles, it does not rise again without force. Churchill, watching from across the Atlantic, senses the shift. His warnings are no longer dismissed outright. They are debated, weighed, studied. But he is also keenly aware of time. Every week of hesitation cements a new reality on the ground. Every compromise accepted becomes precedent. He sends follow-up messages, makes phone calls, speaks privately with American officials whenever he can. His tone remains steady, but beneath it lies frustration. He has seen this movie before. In the 1930s, every delay was justified, every concession rationalized, until it was too late. He will not allow history to repeat itself without protest.
Then, in February 1946, a document crosses Truman's desk that changes everything. 8,000 words, typed in Moscow, authored by an obscure diplomat named George Kennan. It arrives quietly, but its impact is seismic. Kennan's long telegram confirms everything Churchill has been trying to convey, only now it comes from within the American system. The Soviet Union, Kennan argues, is inherently hostile to the West, driven by ideology, suspicious of compromise, responsive only to strength. Containment, not appeasement, must be the strategy. Truman reads it twice, then a third time, because now the warning is no longer British, it is American, and the implications are enormous. Churchill senses it before he hears it officially. The mood has changed. The language in Washington has sharpened, the patience has thinned, the illusion of post-war harmony is dissolving. But with clarity comes danger, because if Churchill and Kennan are right, if Stalin interprets restraint as weakness, then the next step is unavoidable. The world will divide. Not tomorrow,
but soon. And when it does, there will be no middle ground, no neutral ground, only sides. Churchill stares at the map again. The line he described in Fulton is no longer theoretical. It is real, and it is moving. July 1946, the White House, late evening. The air is thick with humidity, the kind that clings to the skin and makes every movement feel heavier than it should. Truman's jacket hangs on the back of his chair. His tie is loosened. The windows are cracked open, but the night offers no relief. Spread across his desk are maps of Europe, creased, annotated, stained with fingerprints and pencil marks. This is no longer a theory. This is a choice. The reports are relentless now. In Berlin, Soviet authorities are tightening control of rail access. Inspections grow longer. Supplies arrive late or not at all. Each disruption is explained away as a technical error, a misunderstanding, a temporary measure. But the pattern is unmistakable. In Iran, Soviet troops delay withdrawal in open defiance of earlier agreements. In Turkey, pressure mounts over control of the Straits. In Greece, a civil war burns, fueled by outside hands. The edges of the map are glowing red. Truman drums his fingers on the desk, eyes scanning Churchill's earlier words once more. Strength, unity, resolve. They are no longer abstract virtues. They are tools or weapons. Inside the Pentagon, planners sketch scenarios they hoped never to draw again. Airlift capacity, naval deployments, forward bases. The atomic bomb looms silently in every conversation, never spoken aloud, but always present. A power so absolute it paralyzes as much as it empowers. Truman knows something Churchill could only suspect. America holds the ultimate advantage. For now. But advantages decay, especially if unused. The president calls in George Marshall. The general's face is lined, weary. He has seen more war than any man alive. His counsel is cautious, but firm. Europe is bleeding economically. Cities lie in ruins, factories stand silent, hunger stalks the continent. And hunger, Marshall warns, breeds extremism. Not just communist extremism. Chaos. Truman listens, because this is the missing piece. Churchill had warned of military and political domination. Marshall reveals the economic battlefield beneath it all. A broken Europe cannot resist anything. The decision begins to crystallize. Not confrontation, not retreat, but engagement. Active, sustained, unavoidable. Truman authorizes what will soon be known as the Marshall Plan, an unprecedented commitment of American resources to rebuild Europe, stabilize governments, and undercut the appeal of Soviet-backed movements. It is not framed as anti-Soviet, but everyone understands the message. The United States is not going home. When news reaches Churchill, he allows himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Not triumph, relief. Because this is exactly what he had hoped to provoke. Not with his letter alone, not with his speech alone, but with both combined.
A shift in the American mindset, from isolation to leadership, from reaction to strategy. Churchill writes again to Truman, this time with a steadier hand. His tone is no longer desperate. It is resolute. Stalin, watching from Moscow, understands immediately. This is not charity. This is containment. He orders Eastern European governments to reject the Marshall Plan. Participation would mean influence. Influence would mean vulnerability. The divide is formalized. One Europe rebuilding with American support. One Europe sealed behind ideology and force. The Iron Curtain does not just descend, it locks. By the end of 1946, the word Cold War was beginning to circulate, first in whispers, then in headlines. A war without battle lines, without declarations, but with stakes just as absolute. Churchill's warning has become doctrine. His plea has become policy. And yet, one question remains unanswered. Had this confrontation been inevitable, or had it been hastened, perhaps even sealed, by the very warnings meant to prevent it? As Truman prepares to address Congress and Churchill watches from afar, the world stands divided not by oceans, but by belief. And once belief hardens, there is no turning back. March 1947, the United States Capitol, noon. The chamber is packed. The air vibrates with murmurs and the rustle of paper as President Harry S. Truman steps forward to the podium. Flashbulbs pop, pens hover. This is no longer a warning delivered in private letters or small-town gymnasiums. This is doctrine. Truman's voice is firm, plain-spoken, unmistakably his own. He speaks not of empires or ideology at first, but of people, of hunger, of fear, of governments collapsing under pressure. Then he draws the line. It must be the policy of the United States, he declares, to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation. The words ripple outwards, crossing oceans in hours. In London, Winston Churchill reads the transcript slowly. He knows this moment. He has waited for it.
Because this is the answer to his plea. The Truman Doctrine formalizes what Churchill sensed before most dared admit. The world has split into two competing visions, and neutrality is an illusion. Aid flows to Greece and Turkey. Advisors follow. Military planners redraw maps with permanence in mind. NATO is no longer an idea. It is inevitable. The Cold War steps out of the shadows and announces itself to history. And at the center of it all is a letter written in urgency and a speech delivered with deliberate defiance. Churchill returns to office in 1951, older now, slower, but vindicated in ways few living men ever are. He meets Truman again. They speak not as prophet and decision-maker, but as veterans of a choice that reshaped the century. Neither celebrates. They understand the cost. Because the Cold War brings no parades, no surrender ceremonies, no final victories. Only vigilance. Behind the Iron Curtain, the decades harden. Berlin is divided by concrete and barbed wire. Hungary rises and is crushed. Prague falls silent. Families are split by borders that they cannot cross. Churchill's line, from Stettin to Trieste, becomes a lived reality. children grow up never knowing the other side. Missiles are built, submarines slip beneath oceans, the world learns to live with annihilation measured in minutes. And yet, there is no Third World War, no final cataclysm, because the line, once drawn, holds. In his final years, Churchill was often on that winter of 1946, on the letter, on the speech, on the risk of being wrong. He knew that calling out the danger could hasten confrontation. Those words, once spoken, cannot be recalled. But he also knew something deeper. Silence has consequences too. History, he believed, does not punish those who warn, it punishes those who look away. Decades later, the Iron Curtain fell not with artillery, but with crowds, with hands pulling down walls instead of building them. When it does, historians return to the beginning, to the moment the warning was issued. On the night Truman read the letter, to the afternoon in Missouri when a defeated prime minister spoke an uncomfortable truth. Churchill did not predict the Cold War.
He recognized it, and by forcing the world to confront it early, before illusion became paralysis, he helped ensure it stayed cold, that it never turned hot, that humanity survived the most dangerous standoff in its history. The lesson remains. Threats rarely announce themselves with explosions. They arrive quietly, in memos, in speeches, in warnings that sound inconvenient. And the future often hinges on whether someone listens.